Okay, I'd like to welcome to the Way Back Country Jamboree today a man who has spent over 7 decades in country music, including his beginning work with Gene Autry and also work starting 40 years in 1958 with Johnny Cash. Please welcome to the show today a personal hero of mine and one of the last true singing cowboys of the 50s, Mr. Johnny Western.
Thank you, Johnny. I appreciate that very, very much.
Yes, well, it's a pleasure to finally have you on. I've been trying to track you down for a few years now.
Well, I retired from the road, Johnny,
Okay.
8 years ago, but I had 64 years on the road and a lot of memories and stuff just before that.
Okay.
So we can start back any place you want to and continue to where you want to go.
Okay, so let's go with born in Northfield, Minnesota on October 28th of 1934. What are your earliest musical memories growing up?
Actually, it's so strange because Gene Autry was my first musical memory that I could recall that I wanted to do anything about or be like. And it was on my 5th birthday in 1939. My dad was an officer in what was then called the CCCs, the Civilian Conservation Corps, during the Depression.
Okay.
We lived in a army camp type thing up in northern Minnesota, about 20 to 25 miles from Duluth. And we had a battery-powered radio.
Yes.
Also, once a week, they showed a movie to everybody at the camp. And on that particular birthday, my 5th birthday, they showed a Gene Autry movie called Guns and Guitars. And I took a look at that guy up on the screen with the snow white hat, the silver-mounted saddle on that beautiful horse, playing those songs with just he and his guitar, and I thought, boy, I want to be just like him, or I want to be him.
Yes. Okay.
Well, so my first musical memory was Gene Autry. Then, of all things, as the good Lord put it, 16 years later, he put me under contract and took me all over the world with him until he retired.
Yes. Okay.
And we spent some quality time in Canada on top of that.
Oh, you did? Yes. Okay.
Oh yeah, we played the CNE, the Canadian National Exhibition.
Yes.
When I first signed with Gene in July of 1956, my first contract date was actually on the 4th of July, our American holiday, in Pueblo, Colorado, for the Colorado State Fair and Rodeo, and we did 3 shows there, played to 36,000 people, and then had 2 days to get up to Toronto for the CNE, and we're there for 14 days.
Amazing. Yes.
And played to well over 1 million people in 14 days. It was just incredible.
I'd imagine it would be.
And
that was the heyday of Gene Autry, too.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, he had made all the movies, made 90-some movies for the theaters, and the Gene Autry television show, which played all over the world in many episodes of the half-hour shows. And, of course, his recordings with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer being the second biggest selling single record of all time.
Exactly, yes.
Bing Crosby and White Christmas. So to be out there on the road, standing right next to my hero, I had taken Johnny Bond's place on the show, and Johnny had been with Gene for over 20 years when he retired.
Okay.
And so I was Gene's personal guitarist as well as a featured singer on the show.
Amazing.
And standing next to my hero for shows like that night after night, day after day, for a couple of years was probably the biggest thrill of my life.
I'd imagine, yes. And did you ever record on any of those old Christmas classics?
Never played on a Christmas song.
No. Okay.
I was in the studio when Gene cut his last Christmas song, and he brought Johnny Bond back just for old time's sake, as he did with Smiley Burnett for his last movie.
Yes.
And recorded a song called Everyone's a Child at Christmas, which was actually written by Johnny Marks, who wrote Rudolph.
Of
and
course,
it turned out to be Gene's last Christmas record. But I didn't play on it, but the thrill of being there, absolutely.
Yeah. And so among your early songs you recorded was a haunting ballad of Ghost Riders in the Sky.
Yeah, I had been thrilled by that song the very first time I ever heard it. Actually, Burl Ives recorded the song first, and did not sell well. It wasn't a big hit of any kind, but I had heard it once or twice on the radio. And then Vaughn Monroe recorded it
Yes.
in 1949, and of course, it was just a monster hit. It went for 14 weeks at the top of the charts all around the world, and eventually became the most famous Western song of all time.
Yes,
and recorded
sure
by
is.
over 1,000 people. One of them was me, fortunately.
Yes.
But it took years and years later to do it. So I used that as an opening song of my shows for an awful lot of years.
Okay.
And in my cowboy years, probably the last 10 or 12 years of my life, when I had pretty much stopped doing nightclubs and country music shows and had done a complete Western concert series, that was my opening song for the last 12 years of my career for sure.
Amazing, yes, okay. And then in 1958, you wrote and recorded a classic that would become the television series theme song for Have Gun Will Travel. Would you share with us about the Ballad of Paladin?
Well, I was an actor in the show. At that particular time, the Westerns had dominated television. If people listening to us right now will remember the late 50s and on through the early 60s,
Yes.
ABC television here in the States and NBC television and CBS had more than 30 Westerns on the air. They were the dominant thing on the air. And I had got, after Gene retired, put me with his agent who got me some movie parts. And I did eventually 32 Westerns and 5 just for television, and then 5 feature movies for the theaters, again, Westerns. And so it became a very, very dominant part of my life. As an actor in the Have Gun Will Travel show, I just had an idea, and we were on location. My wife was expecting our second baby,
Okay.
on pins and needles out there 40 miles away on location on a big ranch outside of Los Angeles, doing the show, and I had the idea for the Paladin, Where Do You Roam? Obviously far from home because his base was San Francisco.
Yes.
And then, of course, they went to a different location each and every week. With that card, the Have Gun Will Travel card being the entree into where he was going to be and what he was going to do.
Okay.
So the next morning, on the 14th day of March 1958, my second daughter, Leslie, was born at 7 o'clock in the morning. My mother-in-law came over. She was a doctor in L.A. She came over and got my 3-year-old daughter, Louisa, and took her for the day. And at that particular time, you couldn't go back and see your child in the hospital except at visiting hours and only through the glass. So I had all day to kill and was very, very nervous and walking around. Actually, I picked up my guitar and I was singing Ghost Riders with that particular beat.
Oh, yes.
And the Paladin thing kind of just fell into place, and I wrote that song in 20 minutes.
Amazing, yes.
I was going to put it on my little tape recorder at home, and the capstan was off on the thing, and it wasn't working correctly. So when I tried to record, it was like, wow, wow, wow. So this is not going to get it.
Uh-huh.
And since I don't read music, I think I had to get that recorded. A young fellow who owned a recording studio on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood owed me some studio time, and I called him up. I said, can you get me in there for 5 minutes? I just want me and the guitar in an echo chamber, and let me record this one song. He said, 1 o'clock this afternoon, I've got 15 minutes open. I went down, recorded it. He made me a couple of copies of it, and I thought, well, heck. So I took one over to Richard Boone, who was the star of the show. He was Paladin. And
Yes.
said, thank you for having me on the show, and I did a gunfight with him on that particular show. It was kind of a flashy thing, and also had some dialogue with him. And
Yes.
he was very, very kind to me as being a new boy on the set. And I thanked him for that. And then the young guy who had co-created the show was, the guy who had written that particular script was there, Sam Rolfe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave him another copy of the thing and said, gosh, guys, thanks for having me on the show. And went away thinking that was it. Over that particular weekend, without my knowledge, they got together and they played that particular demonstration tape to the big shots at Hollywood's CBS television, and they did the same thing over the hotline to New York, and called me in the next Tuesday. And before I walked out of that office that day, they had signed me as a contract for the songwriter, for the singer, and Mitch Miller, who was running Columbia Records, sing along with Mitch in those days,
Yes.
in New York, had brought me over the telephone for a Columbia record contract.
Amazing.
So at age 23, all of a sudden, I had 3 major contracts with CBS and Columbia Records for a song that I wrote in 20 minutes. And of course, it changed my life completely.
Yes, I'd imagine, yes.
You know, Have Gun Will Travel became the second highest rated show in the world.
That's for sure, yes.
Gunsmoke was the #1 show. Of course, Gunsmoke lasted for 20 years. Have Gun Will Travel was on the network for 6 years, and it has never been off the reruns ever since, which brings to mind the situation that when my agent went to the lawyers at CBS with me to sign these contracts, and I said, Peter, if this thing will just last 3 or 4 years, I'll be the happiest guy in the world. It'll do everything that I ever wanted to do. It will give me a national name on one of the biggest shows in the history of television. It will be on Columbia Records, which I always wanted to be because Johnny Cash was there and Gene Autry recorded for Columbia.
Yes.
So that was going to be my label, and I was thrilled to death to be a part of that. 3 or 4 years, I thought that would be it. Well, coming up next month will be 63 years since I wrote that song.
Well, congratulations. Yes.
So it has just been I guess they call it the Johnny Western annuity, because I had 2 contracts, one for the royalties with BMI, with Broadcast Music Incorporated, and the second is with my publisher, with Universal Music, which is the biggest music publisher in the world. They have the Beatles stuff, and they've got the Michael Jackson stuff, and huge amounts compared to me, but they are a powerful publishing company. And so twice a year I get a royalty check from Universal Music, but every 13 weeks for 63 years I've gotten a check in the mail. We call it mailbox money. It's walked to the mailbox and there's a check.
Yeah.
For every 13 weeks now for the last 62 years, and next month will be 63 years.
Amazing, yes.
It
and
is amazing.
What has that song meant to you personally?
Well, it gave me an identification throughout the world. I have played on both sides of the Atlantic and Pacific, and I'm just amazed at how people throughout the world have recognized that song. Plus, it's been recorded by more than 50 other people.
Yes.
Dwayne Eddy, back in 1962, Dwayne Eddy had a big rock and roll record of it that knocked Elvis off the charts on the same label. It became just a huge success, and then so many album cuts and so many other cuts through the years. But in traveling, I found out that everybody was able to sing along with that song because the TV show was playing United States, Canada, and Mexico, plus 78 foreign countries around the world.
Wow, amazing.
And consequently, it has never been off the air someplace in the world now for 63 years since I wrote that song. The show actually came out in 1957.
Okay.
In the year that and did not have a theme song. I didn't write it as a theme song. I wrote it as a thank you to Richard Boone and Sam Rolfe for having me on the show. They did the rest.
Okay,
and it completely changed my life, yes.
Yes, okay. And so let's go into your meeting Johnny Cash in 1958. What would come about out of that meeting? And what do you remember about first meeting John?
Yes, I do. Actually, I met him at the CNE in 1956 in Toronto.
Okay.
He was appearing at I Walked the Line Out, and he was appearing at the Casino Theater doing 6 shows a day opposite a movie. Now, we did 2 shows a day with the Gene Autry show, playing to hundreds of thousands of people between the matinee and the night show, and of course our night show was over by 9 o'clock, so I caught a cab and ran down a couple, 2, 3 nights in a row to see Johnny Cash on the stage there. I was just fascinated by his voice and by that record. I actually had heard Folsom Blues before that.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a kind of a fascination to see what he looked like, and I'd never seen a picture of him at that time. And, of course, what he sounded like on stage. Actually, he had the flu the whole time he was there, very, very ill. So when I got a chance to shake hands with him and meet him, told him that I was working with Gene Autry at the CNE. He said, I love Gene Autry. It turned out that they would become very, very good friends many years later. But the first thing he said was, I love Gene Autry. Good luck to you. Then 2 years later, when he moved from Memphis to Los Angeles, that's when we put the show together. He had come out there. He wanted to do some acting parts in Western movies, as well as his singing career. And of course, the only place that was going to happen was in L.A. with the Hollywood film industry. So he moved out. He bought Johnny Carson's house. Johnny Carson went to New York with Ed to do the Tonight Show, and when he left, he sold his house to Johnny Cash. Johnny Carson sold his house to Johnny Cash.
Yes.
And that kind of became our headquarters out there when Johnny put the show together.
Okay.
So we went. Gordon Terry was my best friend who had moved up from Nashville to Los Angeles and been out there a few months. And when Johnny and his family moved out, and they had worked together on some dates before. So we went down to Johnny's office in 1958, which is on Sunset Boulevard at that time,
Yes.
a place called the Crossroads of the World.
Okay.
Walked in, and he remembered me from Toronto, and I said, well, that was a very brief thing. He said, yeah, it sure didn't feel good up there. Wish we could have spent more time together. He said, you know, I'm thinking about putting together a road show, and maybe you'd be interested in going along. He said, Gordon's worked some dates with me before and said, I'm thinking about you guys, and of course the Tennessee Two, Luther Perkins and Marshall Grant, never did like it in Los Angeles, so they basically stayed in Memphis.
Oh, okay,
But,
yes.
and he said, we'll get a girl singer for the show. Let's see how that works out. Now, this was 1958, in the month of November,
Yes.
and about a week later, he called me and said, I've got 3 dates. I've got Bakersfield, Fresno, and Sacramento, California. And he said, it's just going to be a small show, just me and you and the Tennessee Two. Would you be interested in going? And I said, absolutely. I thought, you know, this is going to look great on my resume, recording and doing other things and so forth, and that it would look good. I worked 3 dates with Johnny Cash on the road. Well, never dreaming what was going to happen.
Yes.
Those dates sold out way in advance. And then about a week later, he called and said, I've got a tour coming up right after Christmas and goes for 16 dates out through the Midwest of America. And he said, all one-nighters, you want to go? I said, wow, that's 19 dates. That's really going to look good. So, of course, we went. And that just started. So the show became the road show then in 58 and 59. And again, I thought, well, that's 19 days. That's really wonderful. Just cut to the chase here. And by the time we finished touring together with Johnny, of course, had been diagnosed with a form of Parkinson's and a form of diabetes that made it impossible for him to perform on stage anymore.
Yes.
He did continue to record, but he couldn't perform anymore. I have been with him for 1 month shy of 40 years.
Amazing. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, it is amazing.
And so, if I may ask, was one of the albums you guys cut Bitter Tears?
Bitter Tears.
Yes, it was the
Indian album, the tribute to the North American Indians.
Yes.
That was something he wanted to do. Of course, in 1964, he had recorded the Ballad of Ira Hayes.
Yes.
Now, where I live here in Arizona, I live in Mesa, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix.
Okay.
We're a big suburb. We are 468,000 people in the Valley of the Sun. The Phoenix Valley is now over 4.5 million people.
Yes.
But our suburb is 468,000 people. And when we lived in Scottsdale, when my wife and our family lived in Scottsdale, we lived 1 block away from the dividing road between us and Scottsdale and the Pima Indian Reservation, which is where Ira Hayes was from. Ira Hayes died on that reservation. Of course, for those who are younger and don't remember, Ira Hayes was one of the 6 people in the United States Marine Corps who raised the flag on Iwo Jima and became one of the most signified pictures of all time and recognizable pictures of all time.
Yeah.
Sadly, Ira Hayes died a very sad death here after the war, and it was a tribute to Ira Hayes that Johnny Cash wanted to do, so we did that recording. And then I had a partner in California. We had a promotional deal, not for my records on Columbia Records, but for other people's records.
Yes.
We had some things going with Roy Clark and Hank Thompson and Wanda Jackson, Tex Williams, a few of the other artists. We promoted their records. And Johnny Cash hired us to promote the Ballad of Ira Hayes because the radio stations were not playing it.
Okay.
They didn't think it was commercial and one thing another. So he took a big ad in Billboard magazine and Cashbox magazines, the trade magazines for the recording industry at that time, and then got 500 extra copies and 45 copies of the Ballad of Ira Hayes, and had us send them out with personal notes from him. He sat in our office and wrote out 500 little notations, individual for disc jockeys across the country and in Canada. Said, please play this record. It's worth playing. Well, it did. It went to #1 in many, many places. And in the Billboard charts, it went to the top 10.
Okay.
That was the inspiration to create the Bitter Tears album as a tribute to the Indians.
Yes.
Now, Johnny always said he didn't have an ounce of Native American blood in him, but he had that feeling, as he always had for the underdog, like the Prisoners of the prison albums that he recorded.
Exactly.
San Quentin
Yes.
and Folsom Prison. He had that feeling for people. And of course, in North America, the Indians had been the underdogs for a long time. Had been beaten out of it by treaties with the government out of their land, extremely poor conditions and so forth. And he wanted to do something as a tribute to the Indians, and that's what he did. So one led to the other. The Ballad of Ira Hayes led to the Bitter Tears album.
Okay, sure. And so, if I may ask, you also, I understand, played Kingston, Ontario with Johnny Cash.
I played on my guitar as rhythm guitar
Yes.
and a few lead guitar things on 71 singles with him for Columbia Records and 5 LPs, an album.
Yes.
Of course, today it's kind of look at my grandkids and great-grandkids look at albums and they don't know what they are. I keep telling them they're licorice pizzas because they're so used to either downloading things or having CDs. Even cassettes, of course, are gone. And the big albums are now coming back, of all things.
Yes.
The big companies are producing vinyl after all these times, which is wonderful.
Yes,
but at the time, albums were everything. And so I ended up doing 5 albums as an instrumentalist and 71 singles with him.
I see. And
it was fun. It was a lot of fun to do those shows. He was, for the first part, the first few years, he was singing great. He hadn't had any voice problems yet. His amphetamine use had not taken over.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that, yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun doing those sessions. As a matter of fact, one thing was kind of amazing to us because we would knock out an album in 3 or 4 hours. We did one album called, Now There Was a Song. It was 12 songs recorded by all of his friends, from George Jones to Ferland Husky to Hank Thompson. And we knocked those songs out. We added Hank Williams' old steel player, Don Helms, who was Johnny's favorite steel player. Gordon Terry played fiddle. I played guitar. Floyd Kramer played piano on that particular album. He was doing a lot of sessions at that time.
Okay.
And we knocked that whole album out in 4 hours.
Amazing.
Now, the cost was probably just a few $1,000s. And then we would read later on about people spending $200,000 to make an album and taking a year to make it. 26 sessions it took the Beach Boys to do because of Brian Wilson's incapacitation. 26 recording sessions to do Good Vibrations.
Amazing.
At a cost for a single of over $50,000 just for the single. And we knocked those things out like cordwood. We did the first concept album that had ever been done for country music with Johnny Cash, and did it in a 6-hour period with 2 recording sessions where he did narrations and the singing. We did all the playing and knocked those out in 2 recording sessions for Ride This Train.
Oh, Ride This Train, yes. That was
Ride
a classic
This Train,
as
which
well.
was the thing. And on that particular album, there are 2 songs, Loadin' Coal and Boss Jack, that I played the lead guitar on. Merle Travis had traveled with us on the Cash show, and he ended up in the hospital losing about 2/3 of his stomach, so he was off the road for a couple of years, and gave me his famous Merle Travis Martin guitar with the Bigsby neck on it to take on the road and to play on recording sessions. For 2 years, I played that guitar.
Yeah.
So on that particular album, that is me playing the Merle Travis guitar in his style for those particular songs on the Ride This Train album.
Okay. Yes.
So that was a fun thing that came along like that.
Yes.
And we had a variance, Johnny, in those days of being
friendly
in a very big puddle in Los Angeles, but it was still a small town to the music industry. And so everybody kind of knew everybody else, and he developed favorite people, and one of Johnny's favorite people was Merle Travis.
Yes.
Now, I knew Merle Travis because he was Gene Autry's best friend.
Okay.
When I was touring with Gene Autry, and Merle Travis, of course, had written 16 Tons, which was a monster hit for Tennessee Ernie, and he had all these great folk songs, the coal mining songs of his own.
Yes.
So he toured with us on the Gene Autry show 2 years before I ever started working with him on the Johnny Cash show.
Amazing.
It was just like a big family, Johnny, is what it was, and it was more fun than you could even think about, because at that particular time, everybody was straight as a string. Nobody was indulging in recreational drugs and so forth.
Okay.
We didn't have. We had a couple of people in the business that were well known for being overserved at the bars around the nation, around Canada, whatever.
Yes.
George Jones being probably the main culprit
Of course,
there.
yes.
You know, but these weren't happening for the first few years on the Cash Show.
Okay.
As the pressure increased through the years is when we fell into the barrel with Johnny.
Yes.
Johnny Cash, with the amphetamines, which have been so well documented in all the books about him. He's written about it in his books and both of his biographies. The narrative films that have been done about him, all, of course, have gone into the thing in great detail.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't happen till later on. In the beginning,
Okay.
it was fun. It really was.
Okay.
And we had some great tours, including up in your part of the country, which brings Kingston very
Yes.
much to mind.
Okay.
Because in 1961, Johnny had a different management situation. He had a fellow named Stu Carnell on the West Coast that had taken over his management thing. Stu was kind of a playboy, and he wasn't getting the job done, but he booked a bunch of dates with Saul Hollis out of London, Ontario, Canada,
Yes.
who was booking show dates. We had worked a couple of dates with Saul before, and he'd done a wonderful job. But Saul went ahead and booked a series of dates starting at Toronto and Massey Hall, which, of course, is your Carnegie Hall of Canada.
Exactly. Yes.
A wonderful place. So I played it first in 1961, and from Massey Hall, we went on and played a whole bunch of Ontario dates, including Kingston,
Yes.
Peterborough, Timmins. Now this is funny because there's a lot of publicity about Shania Twain
Yes.
coming from Timmins, Ontario, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we played it in 1961. Shania Twain was not born until 1965.
Exactly.
We were there for 4 years before she was even born.
Uh-huh.
But of course, it put Timmins on the map. And we also played North Bay, Ontario. Now, something happened out there that particular night. There was only one telephone. It was a pay telephone in the back of the arena that we were playing in North Bay. And Johnny had been trying to get a hold of Stu Carnell, his manager, all day long. It turned out that Stu had been at the racetrack at Santa Anita betting on the horses all day and was not anywhere near a telephone. You know, nobody had cell phones in those days.
Yeah.
So when Johnny finally got him on the phone, he was so upset with the fact that Stu had blown off another business deal that he fired him over the telephone. I was 1 foot away when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, boy, this is going to be something else because now he has no management of any kind. We finished out the tour, and Saul had done an absolutely wonderful job. All those dates were hugely successful, all sold out. Management was top of it, and he wasn't even our manager. So I wrote a letter to Saul after we got off that tour, and I said, Saul, you need to be talking to Johnny about a management deal because he needs somebody like you. He can't do it with the type of management that he has had. He was on the verge of becoming a superstar, but he needs that extra push. Consequently, from that letter, Saul told me that they made a deal, and he became Johnny's manager, still headquartering out of London, Ontario, Canada.
Yes.
But he booked us all over the place. We ended up also at the end of 1961 in the Maritimes and out to Newfoundland.
Okay.
We played every place you could play in Newfoundland, and the reason that was booked, it turns out, and seems to be coming back, Saul's son, Jonathan, who lives in British Columbia, made a 90-minute documentary called My Father and the Man in Black, which has won a lot of documentary awards around the world.
Yes.
And Saul was also written up in a book by a young lady called The Man Who Carried Cash. So there's
Yes, I remember that book, yes.
right. So, you know, this kind of the legend of Saul Hollis is now kind of coming into being because he's the guy from 1962 to 1972, that 10-year period, that pushed Johnny Cash into the great super strata that he's become. And, of course, the legend still goes on bigger and better even today, 19 years later.
Exactly.
18 years later, I'm sorry. So, consequently, Saul was a very, very important part of our lives. And he did take over the management thing and did all these things. But he made a deal with your biggest, at that time, back in 1961, 62, your biggest outdoor magazine for hunters and fishermen in Canada want to sponsor a moose hunt and have Johnny Cash up as their guest on this moose hunt, photograph the whole thing, and publish it in the magazine.
Oh, yeah.
So we did that, but in addition to which, we're going to go to Newfoundland for that moose hunt. Saul booked dates, 15 of them, with every place that you could play, including at Stephenville, where we have an Air Force base up there.
Yes, yes.
And so we played all those dates, and he went on the moose hunt and took care of that piece of business and stuff, and he really solidified their management deal with that particular deal, which is now, for some reason, according to Jonathan, coming back. They're reviving that thing, and they're making a documentary film about it, about the moose hunt and all of us being there. So Gordon Terry and I and the Tennessee Three at that time, we had added W.S. Holland on the drums at that time.
Yes.
He came on the band in August of 1960, so it went from the Tennessee Two to the Tennessee Three at that particular period of time. And so we had a girl singer. The first girl singer we ever took on the road was Rose Maddox from the West Coast, who had a very successful career with her brothers, the Maddox brothers and Rose, very popular out there, and since she was a West Coast thing, we added Rose, and Rose was with us on the Canadian dates and so forth, and of all things, right in the middle of that Canadian tour, when we were in the Maritimes and up in Newfoundland, she got word that her son had just joined the United States Marine Corps, and he was her only child. She'd been divorced after she and the father bailed out years before, so she was the sole support and reason for being for her son. And without her knowledge, he joined the Marine Corps, and she left the show right in the middle of our Newfoundland dates and flew back to the West Coast to try to get him out of the Marine Corps and stop that from happening, you know. So consequently, we ended up the rest of that tour without Rose, but we did have Merle Travis with us, which was a great asset to the show. So we had a lot of Canada.
I see.
Yes.
So if I may ask about two of my favorite songs of yours.
All right.
First of all, The Streets of Old Dodge City.
Really?
Yes, I love that one. It really paints the picture, that one. And the other one is Cottonwood Tree.
Oh, yeah. Well, I wrote The Streets of Old Dodge City for a movie. In 1970, a couple of young producers from Dodge City, Kansas, made a documentary movie. And they got Wyatt Earp himself, Hugh O'Brien, to narrate the movie.
Oh, yes.
And they needed a song and a soundtrack thing for the music to go with this picture called Dodge City, The Crisis in the West, which took the history of Dodge City and the cattle drives and the days that have been depicted so much in the movies and on television shows through the years, including the Wyatt Earp TV series with Hugh O'Brien for so many years. Anyway, they liked my Have Gun Will Travel song, The Ballad of Paladin, and approached me about doing it. I said, yes, I can do that because I've been to Dodge City. I was, of all things, in Dodge City with Marshall Dillon, with Jim Arness, and the Gunsmoke Gang. We went there in 1958 to rename the main street of Dodge City, Kansas, Gunsmoke Avenue. There already was a Wyatt Earp Boulevard, but they took the cross street, the main street in downtown Dodge City, and had a 3-day celebration to do that. Of course, Gunsmoke was the #1 song in the world at that time, so it was a big deal. But I had a background on Dodge City. I had met the real marshal of Dodge City at that time, who was in the film, and I had an easy way to sit down and write that song. So it was about a 30-minute project to do it, and recorded it. And then they decided, the Dodge City Chamber of Commerce decided that since Boot Hill, the old graveyard there in Dodge City, was so famous that they would start their own record label and make it available to all the tourists that came to Dodge City through the years on the Boot Hill label. And they wanted me to record the theme song and then use that soundtrack for their recording and put the Ballad of Paladin on the other side. So that's exactly why you got that copy with it's what's called a limited edition at the time, because it was specifically for the Dodge City Chamber of Commerce and all the people who've come to that city for so many years.
Okay.
Now, Cottonwood Tree was written by the greatest Western songwriter, in my opinion, that ever was, the late and very great Stan Jones. Now, Stan Jones wrote Ghost Riders in the Sky, he wrote the theme song for the John Wayne movie The Searchers, which I also recorded with the Sons of the Pioneers. And of the 12 songs on my Have Gunboat Travel LP for Columbia Records, 6 of the songs were written by Stan Jones, including Cottonwood Tree.
Okay, yes.
And that's, I love the song. Originally, Ken Curtis, who was the lead singer for 8 years with the Sons of the Pioneers and was actually, of course, so famous later on as Festus on Gunsmoke. Great voice of Ken Curtis, had recorded the Cottonwood Tree for a small label in California at that time. And I heard it, loved the song, thought if I ever got a chance to do it, I'm going to do that song either for a single or for an album.
Yes.
And it turned out to be, the timing was just right. So
Well, it's a
Stan
great one,
Jones
too.
was my hero as a Western songwriter. Of course, Bob Nolan, who wrote Tumbling Tumbleweeds and Cool Water and all those great classics. I always said that Bob Nolan painted beautiful Western picture art with his songs. Stan Jones made movies with his.
Yes.
And you think about The Searchers and things like that, his songs fit those movie things just exactly right.
Exactly, that's for sure.
So that's how I happened to record that song. Stan, unfortunately, had a massive heart attack at age 49, and he's buried here in Arizona in his home area, Douglas, Arizona, in what they call the Cochise Stronghold over there, overlooking the mountains where he grew up and loved and was inspired to write the songs like Ghost Rider.
Okay, yes.
So, that's how that particular thing came down the line there, Johnny.
Okay. And another one is Hannah Lee, The Gallows Are Tall. How did that one come about?
That was another movie song.
Okay.
Yeah, it was another movie song. An actor named MacDonald Carey had a picture career before he went into soap operas for about 35 years here in American television in the afternoons. The famous soap operas were so popular for so long.
Yes.
And the picture was called Hannah Lee, and Gene Autry's trio, the Cass County Boys, who I worked with on the Autry show for a couple of years, they recorded that song for the soundtrack of the movie, but I had never heard a record of it. And I thought, I've got a copy of that soundtrack. I love that song. If the movie was not a big budget Western, it was not a real big hit. But I loved that song. I got a copy of the soundtrack and put Hannah Lee on that album also. So that has been another favorite song that keeps bringing up.
Exactly.
The Riders in the Sky group have taken that album and some of my songs under their wing and have promoted and done some of those songs on stage.
Yes.
And Hannah Lee is one of them.
Okay.
So that makes me very happy at this stage in my life and that stage of the game.
Yes, exactly. So what is your thoughts on the modernization of music coming out of Nashville these days?
Well, Johnny, I'm an old dog.
Yes, so am I.
I'm a dinosaur in this business. I started in this business when I was 14 years old with my first video show.
Okay.
And I had a 64-year career.
Okay.
Lucky every single day of it, from the time I was 14 until I retired here 8 years ago, this past October. And I have watched country music and Western music be homogenized, overproduced, and changed to the place where country music today is virtually unrecognizable to me.
Yes.
It's all voiceover. Nobody sings by themselves anymore, and it's homogenized rock and roll.
Exactly.
For the most part, there are a few acts. Garth Brooks is being the biggest single recording act in the history of the industry, has maintained the quality that he started with, which was one voice and his songs that he wrote, and he's maintained that in the things. Well, even though he hasn't recorded much lately, but he's still a giant, box office wise.
Yes.
Biggest thing that ever happened. And so there are a few, and George Strait did it so well for the, 61 number one records that'll never be equaled again. And you could always recognize George Strait on everything he ever did, which is monumental, and it's wonderful. In my day, in the heydays and so forth, when you had the stylists, the Buck Owens and Hank Thompson,
yes,
and people that the Ernest Tubb, the minute Loretta Lynn, Tammy Wynette, the minute the record came out, the first couple of bars, you knew exactly who that was.
Exactly,
You
the
didn't even
same
have
as
to hear the
yours.
voice on it. You knew who it was from the time that the little overture started at the beginning, and those signatures lasted for years and years and years. They were Merle Haggard, 30, 40, 50-year careers. And of course, with Johnny Cash, it's never going to end because the legend lives on so big. It's incredible.
Yes.
In fact, it's very, very hard to believe that Johnny
Has almost been gone 20 years, yeah.
Yeah, 18 years.
Yeah.
And Waylon Jennings did it pretty well. Waylon Jennings, 55 years ago, coming up this coming April, introduced me to my wife.
Okay.
And I would not have her, we would not have our daughter Brandy without Waylon Jennings. But
Yes.
he was so against what was happening in Nashville that he created his own thing. He said, with RCA Records, where he was under contract, said, I'll produce the records, you release them, and we'll do it my way.
Yes.
Well, that's exactly what they did. To huge success with the horrible thing that happened 19 years ago on the day before Valentine's Day, which is coming up in just a few days. Waylon Jennings had moved back from his home in Tennessee. We always talked about that. I was coming back to Arizona, and he was coming back to Tennessee. And he and Jessie Coulter, his wife, had moved into a beautiful home in Chandler, Arizona, which is another suburb of Phoenix, directly south of us here in Mesa.
Yes.
About 15 minutes away from where I'm talking to you right now.
Okay.
And on the day before Valentine's Day, he lay down at 1 o'clock in the afternoon to take a nap while his wife was shopping, and he never woke up.
I know.
He was 64 years old.
Way too young. Yes.
Way, way, way too young. And he's buried in her family plot here in the Mesa Cemetery, again 15 minutes away from where we're talking right now.
Okay.
And a real heartbreaker because Waylon had been such a big part of my wife's life.
Yes.
She was his adopted sister. He said, I never had any blood sisters. I've got 3 blood brothers in Texas. But he said, she's the closest thing I've got to a sister, and I just adopted her years ago.
Yes.
So that's the way he introduced her to me, was as his adopted sister. So he was kind of my adopted brother-in-law from all those years and so forth until his very untimely passing.
Yes. Okay.
But he did it his way.
He sure
And
did.
again, Johnny, instantly recognizable. When you play a Waylon Jennings record, you know right now who it is, who it was.
That's
No
for
doubt
sure.
about it. And there's no confusion. It's not homogenized rock and roll.
It's real.
Bare bones and it's real, absolutely.
Exactly.
So my thought on that is, for the kids today, they got to have their own thing just like we had it in our day. And, you know, it's not my cup of tea, so I don't have to listen to it, and I don't.
Exactly. That's right.
We have, in a city of 4.5 million people, in Phoenix, we have 2 supposedly top country stations.
Okay.
One of them, unfortunately, was the station that Buck Owens put on the air many years ago back in the 60s, and was one of the great country stations of all time. It's still big in the ratings. It's KNIX here in Phoenix.
Okay.
But I don't listen because they're playing nothing but their so-called top modern country, today's country they call it, and it's not my cup of tea, so I just don't do it.
Okay.
I had a radio career that lasted a long time in my life playing classic country music.
You
and
sure did.
You know, and the Western thing, of course, has been the dominant thing in my life. And it just makes me a dinosaur, and that's fine with me because it's a part of my life that I never will forget a minute of. I've had such a great time doing it.
Yes.
And thanks to people like you who keep it alive and well, some of our older listeners out there seem to still enjoy it, which is wonderful.
We sure do. And we're trying to keep the legacy alive with your music.
Well, you're doing just exactly right. I'm thinking back of the Canadian tour that we've talked about earlier.
Yes.
In 1961, coming through Kingston. You know, that was a wonderful tour for me. I had played a couple of big places in Canada, especially Vancouver and Victoria on the West Coast. You know, I was a West Coast guy. I lived in Hollywood for a lot of years.
Yes.
And when Johnny moved out there, we worked a lot of dates. Of course, he worked all across Canada and eventually took me on those dates. But my beginnings of playing Canadian dates, of course, was the CNE with Gene Autry in 1956. But later on, I played more of the British Columbia type dates, which was fun. We got into Alberta. Finally, I did a 31-day tour of Canada, starting in Calgary,
Oh,
and
yes.
working our way west and finishing in Victoria and Vancouver in 1962 with Lefty Frizzell and Freddie Hart. We just lost Freddie recently.
Yes, we sure did.
90 years old. Bless his heart. He was a great guy. A lot of fun to tour with, and Lefty Frizzell and Freddie and I did this 31 one-nighters. Played a lot of hockey arenas, of course, in the summertime, no hockey. So the arenas were the best place to play, and we did that, and ended up in British Columbia with those dates after 31 days, which gave me a big insight into the rest of Canada, the part I hadn't seen.
Yes,
So
okay.
in my career, Johnny, I got to play from Victoria, which is out in the ocean on the west side,
Yes.
and take that ferry over from Vancouver to get over to Victoria,
Mm-hmm.
to way out in Newfie, in the Maritimes, on the east side, just about as far out as you can be
So
without
right
being in
across the
another
country.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And every place in between. So I've got a lot of wonderful, wonderful memories of Canada. In fact, I've got some things that came out of Canada. On Columbia Records, they issued a different colored label
Oh,
for my
yes.
songs. When the Ballad of Paladin came out, it came out on a different label. On Columbia in the United States, it was on a red label
Okay.
with the various printing, and the copy that I've got is on a blue label, with metallic blue.
Yes.
And I met some wonderful promotion people with Columbia Records at that time, and they sent me a lot of souvenirs of that particular era when I was playing Canada quite a bit. I did have
Amazing.
one big nightclub date up there that I really had a great time for a week.
Okay.
There was, I don't know if it's still there, but there was a big nightclub in Toronto called the Horseshoe.
Yes.
Jack Starr's
Yes.
Horseshoe Club.
Yes.
And Anne Murray, who of course is a native Canadian, was playing over at the Royal York Hotel in Toronto. She was in the showroom there, and I played for a week at the Horseshoe for Jack Starr. And
Okay,
it was a lot
yes.
of fun up there doing that for a week in a nightclub date for 6 nights, and staying at the Four Seasons there in Toronto and making that fun over to do those shows. Met a lot of wonderful people and a lot of folks like yourself that still had a pulse on country music
Yes.
that have contacted me through the years, and it's kind of a thing that's nostalgia, to say the least. Do you remember when you played the Horseshoe in Toronto? Yes, I do. You better believe it. I remember it just as well as playing the CNE.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, that was just unbelievable. It was like Woodstock, night after night, day after day, with a matinee and a night show. Annie Oakley was on those shows with her. Gail Davis, who played Annie Oakley on
Yes.
the TV show, the same
Gail,
name,
yes.
was on that Gene Autry tour also. So we just had people from all of Canada that came to the CNE. It was just
Amazing.
absolutely wall-to-wall people, and we had a marvelous time. And fortunately,
Yes.
I'm still in contact with a few of those people.
Are you? Yes. Okay.
Well, you know, you're sitting in a situation where, Johnny, it's really hard for me to swallow, but Ranger Doug from Riders in the Sky was doing a biography thing a while back, and he interviewed me for a book of his. He said, you know, you're the last living member of the Johnny Cash Show from the 50s.
Yes, you are.
And, you know, and I got to thinking about it, so wow, Luther Perkins, Marshall Grant, the original Tennessee two are gone. Just this past September,
Mm-hmm.
W.S. Holland, Fluke Holland, who played drums on the
Yes.
Cash Show for 37 years,
Yes.
passed away very suddenly. So there's the Tennessee three are gone. Gordon Terry passed away in 2006.
Okay.
Rex Allen Jr. and I were in China when that happened. In 2006, we were the first American cowboys to ever play in China, Red China, and we played on the
China.
Great Wall of China.
Yes.
It was just an amazing type thing. But we were there when Gordon, my best friend, passed away. And so everybody is gone, including June Carter. All the girl singers. We had Rose Maddox is gone.
Yeah.
June Carter is gone. You know, just I'm kind of the Lone Ranger on this deal. I'm the last guy standing.
Yes, I'm
So
sorry.
having a great time with memories. However, let me tell your listeners something that they may be on the lookout for.
Okay.
Through the years, Granada TV in England, in London, England,
Mm-hmm.
have been a giant in the film industry and for television. A lot of your listeners may have seen, I'm sure they did at one time or another, the Johnny Cash at San Quentin special that was on many years ago, in which a boy named Sue came out of that particular film session and recording session for the prisoners at San Quentin Penitentiary in 1969.
Yes.
They did that one, but they have been a giant in the business. They called me here a few weeks ago and sent a film crew from London to my house here in Arizona, and on December the 16th, I did 3.5 hours of taping for a 90-minute special they've got coming out on the life of Johnny Cash, which is going to show in Canada before it shows here in the States. It'll play the UK and Canada before it's released here in the States.
Oh, amazing.
So,
Yes.
something for you and your listeners, and keep an eye out for it when it comes on. It's going to be a pretty interesting show.
Okay.
Then, 2 weeks later, they sent another film crew over, ITV, which is located in London, to do a 1-hour show on June Carter. Which I did. I had actually met June Carter 3 years before Johnny ever did. I
Is
met
that
her in
right?
1952.
Yes.
Johnny never met her until 1955. And so that was a long-running friendship right there. And, of course, for 35 years, she was Mrs. Johnny Cash.
Yes.
Long story short, all these memories coming back, and we did an interview for that show for a 1-hour show on June Carter, a 90-minute show on Johnny Cash. They both should be available in Canada this spring.
Okay, I'll let them know.
They're
that.
they're in the editing stage right now, so when you hear about it, you can let your listeners know, Johnny.
And I'll let you
will.
know, too.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Johnny. It's great to talk with you, and I've had a wonderful time.
Well, I hope so, and I hope to do this again soon, or sometime in the future with you.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it. You know,
Okay.
one thing about an old retired cowboy, I'm available.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll saddle up and go down the trail again sometime.
Right off into the sunset together. Johnny and Johnny.
That's right.
All right. Well, I appreciate you, Johnny.
And we'll be in touch with you. God
Please
bless
do.
you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, bye-bye.
All right.